Well, hello and welcome to the 27th Degree with Chris and Nancy, being broadcast from BioSkills of the Northeast studio in Fall River, Massachusetts. Today we'll be discussing green burials with Joan Pillsbury and Candace Currie. Before we begin our conversation, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Bay Coast Bank. Bay Coast Bank is just right for all of your financial needs. Visit baycoast.bank or call 508-678-7641 to learn more. And Duncan Hearing Healthcare you can trust, with sites in Fall River, Dartmouth, Falmouth, and Centerville. For more information, visit their website, duncanhearing.com. As always, you can support the 27th Degree with Chris and Nancy by subscribing to us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, and by following us on Facebook and Instagram. Also, please remember to leave a review, and 5-star reviews are always greatly appreciated. So let's start off by just hearing a little bit about both of you. And I don't know who we start with, but...
Maybe Joan.
Joan, okay. Let's start with Joan.
Hi, I'm Joan Pillsbury, and I'm a nurse, retired nurse. And I've been doing this work since 2009. Actually, I was listening to NPR and heard Mark Harris discuss his book, Grave Matters, and that was kind of my jumping off point. From then, I was all about green burial. So I've been doing this work for quite a while. In 2015, I joined my local cemetery commission. And in 2020, we opened a green cemetery in our town. So
Okay.
I've had a lot of experience and been talking about green burial forever, it seems like.
That's great. Well, we're excited to hear about it, particularly since I think it's something that many of our listeners don't really have any knowledge of. So, Candace, before we move on, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I had my experience of cemeteries through Mount Auburn Cemetery, which is in Cambridge. And I went to work there in 1998 when I was 40. And my mom had just died, and so I thought she wasn't buried there, but it felt like, oh, this beautiful sacred space that I'm working in. And one of my jobs there was literally tree hugging. I was measuring the diameter of trees to prepare a database of the trees, because Mount Auburn Cemetery is in fact a botanic garden, and it's stunningly beautiful. And I was wandering in the back lot of the cemetery one day, and I saw all these concrete boxes lined up. And I said to the operations manager, so what the heck are those for? And he said, oh, well, after the backhoe digs a grave, they put those concrete boxes in the ground. And the grave is all prepared for when it needs a casket. And I thought, oh my goodness, wow. And I was still sort of naive about what all of that meant. So it was still a few years before Mount Auburn Cemetery became also recognized for doing green burials while I was there.
Nice.
So it's been an interesting journey.
So why don't we start really basic with what a green burial is, because I suspect a lot of our listeners and viewers have no idea what a green burial is.
Yes. It simply is everything going into the ground is biodegradable. And one of the co-founders of Mount Auburn Cemetery, his name was Jacob Bigelow, and he had written a paper in 1830. And one of the things he wrote is, the elements which have once moved and circulated in living frames do not become extinct nor useless after death. They offer themselves as the materials from which other living frames are to be constructed. So when you parse that, it's basically the human body is meant to decompose. And from that, you could become a tree. You could become fodder for all the critters that live in the soil. So green burial encourages locally sourced materials, as in the containers or a shroud or a soft pine casket. It often involves family participation, and it hopefully is using environmentally friendly practices to take care of the land. So it's a way to responsibly put ourselves into the ground with all things that will decompose with it. That's the That's why I like to say the simplest thing is everything going into the ground is biodegradable, including us.
So, Candace or Joan, can you just describe, because I didn't know that I was going to be buried in concrete. Like, and I just thought people are going to dig a hole and pop Nancy in there. So, can you just kind of go over what a traditional burial is?
I think that'd be good to do because I just thought the coffin went in the ground.
Yeah, exactly. Like
That
I
was
didn't
but
know all these
apparently
ins and outs.
That's not the case.
No, they're just going to dig a hole. I'm going to be in a concrete box, I guess.
That's when I've gone to you know, kind of services at the you know trying to
Cemetery,
the cemetery. I've never seen concrete.
I guess it's well landscaped and well hidden from you that you don't see.
So tell us a little bit about what traditional burial is, because I think we need to understand that to understand the difference truly.
Like I didn't know like it was bad for the environment and that it was all encased.
I had no
We're
idea.
encased in various layers.
So there are two. Let me just back up to the full cemetery for a second.
Okay.
When you compare a cemetery setting, we have this picture of a lot of gravestones and flowers and a flat lawn.
Yeah.
That would be what we call a conventional cemetery of today. The convention of today, virtually all cemeteries across Massachusetts are using those concrete boxes in the ground first.
Oh.
And that's usually somewhere around 1,000 to 1,200 graves per acre. Versus in a natural setting, it's fewer graves per acre, maybe 400 to 600. And there's often a mound of dirt over the burial. So there's no place for the back lot where after a backhoe digs a grave to move the contents from this, to take the soil and move it to the back lot. With a natural burial, that doesn't happen. It all stays at the graveside. And so that's the wider comparing the cemetery settings. And then if you get right down to look at the difference of the graves themselves, often there's some type of lowering device in a conventional setup. And that lowering device may in fact have a vault, which is also a form of a grave liner. And the vault is also set up. The vault is waiting to receive the casket, and then the vault cover closes, and then both those two things together go down into the ground, and that is what it goes into the grave.
I didn't know that. Did you know that?
No, I had no idea. So the vault is the cement box, basically,
And
that the
sometimes,
casket goes into.
like we have a picture where it's copper looking. So in fact, it might be concrete that's been painted copper to make it look like it's metal, but it's not.
Okay.
There's also a traditional Jewish burial. In those burials, it's important that the body come in contact with the earth. So in those cases, they won't have first the concrete box that's above ground and then everything gets lowered. It might have the concrete box in the ground already, and about 75% of that box is cut out. So in fact, when the casket or the shrouded body goes into the grave, it does in fact come in touch with the earth, according to Jewish law.
Mm-hmm.
But it still has this concrete box also in the ground.
Oh.
It's doing something. It's doing a couple of things. It may, if you have really sandy soil, it keeps the sides of the grave up.
Okay.
If after the burial occurred, it's helping to keep the lawn area flat. And if a backhoe is digging the grave, a backhoe is putting out outriggers sometimes.
Oh.
It will stop the collapse of a neighboring grave if it gets
that makes sense.
too heavy or too out of whack. But by far and large, the amount of concrete going in the ground to protect the casket, it's all really part of that, and keeping a flat lawn. I personally feel from an environmental standpoint, that type of concrete would be much better used in making larger drainage culverts or fixing our bridge abutments that are failing right now.
Right.
So there's ways to use concrete, and then that I think are more speak better to climate change than trying to put them in the ground, because they don't really protect the body. The body is made to decompose. So sometimes it also helps to pack graves in more tightly. And that's also an important issue because towns are responsible for burying their dead. So that means they need to have a place. So that's why our municipal cemeteries, they're really looking for ways to really pack them in. So it's important on many levels to understand the difference and to know that if you've lived your life wanting to have organic food and you're perhaps you're a farmer and you know that your old pet dogs are buried on the property somewhere. You've buried them naturally, and you want to be have also that natural death.
Right. Is that
So
the way they used to do it, like in the olden days? Can you I'm just looking at your slide here, and you have a really cool slide that's titled Historical Perspective. So,
yeah. So Mount Auburn Cemetery was founded in 1831. They didn't have this thing called embalming back then. It wasn't until the Civil War when they started embalming soldiers who died on the battlefield. They were from the North, but they died in a Southern battlefield. And they, in fact, were embalmed with an arsenic substance.
Oh.
And that was so the families in the North could at least see their loved one before they actually buried them.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time Lincoln is killed in 1865, embalming with arsenic was well known, and it became really well known because he was seen by millions of people as the funeral train went from DC through all the New England towns in New York and all the way to Springfield, Illinois. And he was embalmed with an arsenic substance.
So this is Lincoln.
And as a result of all of that, that is now the beginning of the funeral industry.
Oh.
And so if embalming was good enough for the president, certainly it's good enough for all the rest of us. And
so that's kind of where it started.
Yeah. And at that point in time, what also happened is we went from taking care of our own dead in our home parlors to now we start to develop the funeral parlor. And we outsource this idea of preparing the body for a grave. And that was sort of the beginning of embalming here in the States.
So was there a concern with arsenic leaching into the environment? Was that a problem? Or I'm wondering why they then came up with this whole cement box that we're putting caskets in now. Was it more to keep the land above stable and pack in more bodies, or were there other concerns too?
It was more about keeping the land stable because in fact, like the Jewish liner, the bottom was mostly gone. So anything from the body is in fact leaching out. If there is anything from the body, it is already leaching out into the soil. And the soil is a super great filter. And there are really strict guidelines when trying to create a new cemetery. So it's not keeping fluid from the body into the grave. It's about managing the surface of the grave.
Yeah, I guess when you think about it, it all seems kind of silly, right? That we're doing all that just to keep the ground even above. I never thought of the reason.
I mean, I guess now I understand. You have great slides. So when I'm looking at the slide saying comparing the cemetery setting, and it is like the conventional cemetery is all nice and flat, and I guess that's because there's all like if you could have like a little X-ray machine, there's all like little boxes underneath with all our bodies.
Yeah.
And then this pretty like green cemetery, you have these mounds and not so packed in, right?
Right.
Huh. So then, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I went to visit Green Springs out in Ithaca, New York, and I know Joan's been there too. And so that's almost 300 or it might be closer to 600 burials per acre. And when I said, well, what are you going to do when it's full?
Right.
And the response was, we're going to get more land to conserve. And I thought, that's not going to be so easy.
Right. Is that the
so-
struggle you have trying to identify like areas for green burials? Because I imagine, like, I have never heard of this before, so I didn't know that right in Providence, there's 2 green burial cemeteries. Can you talk a little bit about that and what goes in to making a cemetery green, and if people are interested in doing something like this in their locale, what that looks like? I gave you a lot to answer to there.
Yeah, so I'll speak to the 2 that I know of in Rhode Island. There's Swan Point in Rhode Island is a beautiful rural cemetery. It has a section for green burials. And so it does conventional burials as well as green burials. And they sold out their first area and they had to create a second area.
Oh.
So it's popular. And there's also a beautiful little natural cemetery on Prudence Island, which is a little nature reserve. It's lovely. And Joan, maybe you know some of the others down in that neck of the woods on the South Coast?
Well, in the South Coast, there's Yarmouthport, which is a private cemetery, and that's a natural cemetery. And there was actually a physician. No, he's a doctor of music, I guess. He's not a physician, who just is very passionate about green burial, and he opened this area, and so he is private. So I think that they offer to non-residents as well. So, and then another one that's kind of far from the Fall River area is Sharon. That's another
Not that
private
bad. Not that bad.
cemetery.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
now, when we're looking at we talked a little bit about the burial preparation and the comparison. Can you talk about that as far as how that impacts families and how they're involved in this whole burial process?
Well, I can speak to that, I think. So the families may choose to use this as an option for their loved one, and that's wonderful. It does take quite a bit of planning, though. It's not something that you can decide to have the week of the person's death, but it's something that you need to start planning for.
Right. So if Chris dies tomorrow, like, I can't go green bury him. It's like he would have to be planned.
You might be able to, but it would take some.
I'm just going to be dumped in the ocean anyway, so
Are you?
yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
That's a whole other topic we can talk about. So
yeah.
We could.
Yeah. Burial at sea.
Yeah.
But it does take some preparation. First, you have to find a site, and then you need to plan to take care of the body. Are you going to use a funeral home, or are you going to do it yourself? There, it just opens so many options for you. So that's something that, and everything that goes into the ground is biodegradable. So it's a good idea to think about when you're purchasing like coffins or things like that, that it should be locally sourced. So, you may see an advertisement for a nice shroud on the internet, but it comes from England. Well, that's quite a bit of carbon you're going to be using to get that brought back to you, your area. So,
Joan, you say a lot of interesting things, because I don't even consider the carbon footprint sometimes. Like, I always thought like cremation was kind of green burial, but I guess it's not.
No, it uses an awful lot of carbon, actually.
To really burn us up, I guess.
Yes. Well, they have to run the torch for 90 minutes at how many
Very
thousand
high
degrees?
Right?
Like
2,000.
Yeah, 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah. So I mean, imagine, your oven at home probably goes up to 500 degrees, right? And so that's more than 3 times what's going on at your home oven. And it takes, and some people have beautiful mahogany caskets that they also cremate. So even that's going up in smoke.
Right.
And so there's some type of fossil fuel being burned in addition to the body for at least 90 minutes. And that's the newer equipment. And then there's, after the cremation itself, the bones are then pulverized because the bones are left over. So you can, in fact, bury those also, or bury them at sea, bury them in the ground, or often people just leave them up on the shelf, right?
Mhm.
I'll have my
Right.
kids take care of it, Uncle
Right.
John,
Right.
when I move out of the house.
Wh- wh-
So
yeah. So with a green burial, is there any embalming that's done or not? Do they,
No
no
embalming,
embalming. It's
nothing.
just-
The body dressed in biodegradable clothing, wrapped in either a shroud or in a pine box.
okay.
And we do have we have a slide that has a couple of four actually examples of containers.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all going into the ground directly with no liner or anything, so that there can be, because the organisms that help with decomposition are in the first 18 to 24 inches. So you don't want to be buried 6 feet under. You want to be
Okay.
buried in a just below the smell
Oh,
Oh,
right,
interesting.
smell
level.
zone.
the smell zone.
smell zone.
What's
yeah,
the
which is about
smell
18 inches.
zone? That's
Yeah.
18
Well,
inches?
A lot of people ask us about animals digging up graves if they're
Oh,
sort of in a
yeah,
shallow
right.
grave. Yeah, but that doesn't happen if the body is buried
Oh.
below 18 inches.
See, all the
Okay.
true crime podcasts I listen to, I never
Yeah,
knew. They never mentioned the
didn't know
smell
that.
zone.
18 inches. I got to remember that.
Yeah, 18 inches.
Yeah.
So it's,
And I personally like to go for 24 inches.
24.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
18 to 24.
18
Yeah.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
to be
Just to
sure.
be
want
sure,
the
yeah.
24
Good
too.
insurance.
Yeah, there
Okay.
you go.
And,
Okay.
and I think one of the questions you also had, we haven't addressed at all, is so if there's no embalming, but you still want to have the body at home or the body in a
Right.
funeral, the body needs to be cool.
Yes.
So there's different cooling methods. It could be AC. It could be some type of ice being used primarily into the trunk of the body to help keep the body cool, so that the family and the friends have time to say goodbye to the body. And it's in some traditions, they like to wait 3 days before they actually bury the body. And during that length of time, the body, the cheeks might start to sink in. You start to see like, oh, this is no longer my loved one, right? You start to
Right.
see that, in fact, their spirit has gone after these 3 days. And so then you'll be more willing to let go and actually bury the body, and in fact contribute to burying the body by helping to lower the body and then helping to shovel in soil over the body. In a traditional Jewish burial, they do that within 24 hours of the death, so they don't get that same level of watching the body starting to decay, but
Right.
they do.
Right.
There's definitely no embalming in a traditional Jewish burial.
So,
Right.
so do you think that helps with the grieving process? Does it, going through it in that way rather than the traditional way, which is a little it's artificial, quite honestly, right?
It is, and that's kind of what got me started on the green burial too. Also, as an adult, I went to my grandfather's funeral, and I thought, this is terrible. He doesn't look at all like my grandfather.
Right.
And then our family cared for my husband and my boy's father, and it was very satisfying. And it did help with the grieving process for us to participate, take care of him, and actually lower him into the ground ourselves. So that was
Yeah, I would think that would
Makes it a lot more
be that would be helpful through the whole process of grieving and
it is.
and
Yeah.
the understanding.
And
of what's
actually
happened.
my two sons turned around when we were done and said, Mom, I wouldn't want to do it any other way. And they were a little skeptical when I
Yeah.
started talking about this. I mean, I've been talking about it forever, but
Yeah. Yeah.
Though the way that we bury people now, is this an American phenomena or is it European and American? I mean, throughout the world, I'm sure there's differences in the way people are buried. I know there are, and probably there are some cultures where they're doing somewhat of green burials, I'm guessing, as the norm, right?
right. There are. And some countries don't embalm
Mm-hmm.
anyway. I don't know whether they use vaults or not. I went to England and we did go to Westminster Cemetery, and that's a green cemetery.
Oh,
So I think they've been doing green burials for quite a while
I
in
was
Canada.
I was just in the Azores, and it was interesting. We went to a cemetery in a town called Capellish because one of my friends who was with us, he was looking for relatives. He was his family was from that town, and I didn't really understand what was going on till now we're talking. But we spoke to someone at the cemetery just to try to get an idea of, how he would find maybe relatives. And what they said was, after 10 years, they dig up the graves and they take the bones and then they put them basically in a jar. But they're only in the ground for about 10 years. So, and it's the same as you described. It was like a mound of earth. I'd never seen that before. So they're clearly doing green burials. They put the body in the ground for 10 years, and they take what's left, which is probably just bones at that point, and they put it in some type of
They pulverize the
yes.
bones, and then
So
which is the same process they do when flame cremation.
Wait,
or
so
water
what
cremation.
happened? Back up.
So they reuse the grave site.
No, but what happens to the body, like the bones? Like, where did Mary go?
It decomposes. The ground is a wonderful.
But what do they do? What do they do with the bones? Do they kind of like cremate the bones?
This is in the one cemetery in the Azores where I.
But I think that's I've heard that's a popular practice.
They do it in.
Yeah.
Right?
They do it in France. I know
Mm-hmm.
the grave is owned or used by the family for 30 years, and then the bones are dug up and somebody else uses it.
Right.
Huh.
That's it. You're renting.
But
the
that
space.
doesn't happen in the United States yet.
No.
Not yet.
Well, I guess if you're in heaven, who cares?
Well, yeah. I mean, it doesn't really. I guess it's a way to look at it, right? I mean, it's interesting,
Right.
and now I understand why the graves look so different, and they were these mounds of earth, just like you've described, and I see pictures of here. It was the same type of process, apparently.
Primacare is southeastern New England's trusted leader in medical care. With offices in Fall River and surrounding communities, we're dedicated to your well-being. Our carefully selected team of more than 150 providers offers world-class primary and specialty medical care. Primacare doctors are supported by a skilled staff trained to deliver comprehensive radiology, imaging, and testing services. Primacare is large enough to take care of all your medical needs, but small enough to care for you personally. Primacare is by your side.
So to back up just a little bit, we know that there is such a thing, first of all, as green burials. It's much more environmentally friendly. My big aha was cremation isn't green because it's a big carbon footprint that you're utilizing.
Right.
And the traditional burial consists of you being kind of enclaved, I guess, in a cement box with a fancy
metal casket,
which can cost like thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars.
And you're putting all that in the ground.
Now we're transitioning to a green burial in this whole discussion, and we're finding out that it's much more natural. There's no embalming of the body, that we don't get encased in cement, that we're more natural, going back to the earth and being part of nature is probably one intended many, many years ago.
Circle of life.
Exactly.
Yes.
And then looking, can you just, Joan, I think you touched upon this briefly, but can we talk about the different containers for green burials? Because I found this like very amazing.
Well, there's the pine box, which
Yeah.
traditionally when the family was caring for the bodies, the women took care of the body, and then the men built the coffin, and then the family carried the deceased in the pine box with the shroud out to the family cemetery. So we have a slide that has 4 pictures. There's the cardboard coffin, which is biodegradable, obviously, and there is a company in New England actually that makes those, so those are available. And then there's wicker baskets; those are
I
biodegradable.
love these. If I do a
and those
green
are
burial,
made
I'm
out
going to
here
do wicker basket.
in Western Mass.
Mm-hmm.
And then the shroud tray and the body wrapped in the shroud. And the shroud can be a sheet. It could be a quilt, a loved piece of blanket or quilt. or it could be made out of, I mean, there's a woman in Western Mass who makes shrouds out of people's loved clothing, like
Okay.
shirts and things like that. So it is,
You know,
and
it
it doesn't
kind
have to
of
be
gives
expensive.
like a warm, cozy feeling to the burial end of life process, right?
Right.
To know like a
right.
loved one's buried in their favorite quilt or like garments from everyone, pieces of garments from everyone.
It won't be this white
Yeah.
coat. I wear it too much as it is. I do not want to be buried in this.
Okay.
Well, the
I'll
quilt
remember that.
nowadays we're getting back to making quilts with natural cotton batting, but they're for a while they've been, well, they still have
Right.
available
Polyester.
polyester batting, so
Yeah.
that would not be the appropriate quilt. It
Right.
wouldn't
Right.
biodegrade.
Right. You have to get one of those Amish quilts.
Are there times that we can't do green burials, meaning that, I don't know, if there's an event where there might have been some, criminal activity, someone was murdered or whatnot, and, they're worried about having to go back and maybe look at the body at a later time. Does that ever come up? Or do I watch too much CSI?
I think you watched me.
Are you talking about like an exhumation where they have to go back
because
in
obviously
and check for ligature
there's not
marks
going to
or
be much
something?
to exhume if
No, they got to get it right the first
they
time.
got to get it right the first time.
You
So
gotta
that
get it
doesn't
right
come
the
up.
first time, right?
Are there-
And that's up to the medical examiner, right? And there have been green burials after bodies that have needed to be with the medical examiner.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I was going to
is
ask that
possible.
too. I'm glad you addressed that because sometimes when someone dies, it's maybe under suspicious circumstances.
Right, and they do an autopsy
Yeah.
or whatnot. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, they just
Right,
want to find
right.
out what happened. So that's still in line with having a green burial because you would keep the
Absolutely.
body cold.
Yeah.
Although sometimes those bodies can be with a medical examiner for a while.
Really?
That's,
But they're cold.
They're cold.
and
Right,
they are
right.
they're preserved. Yeah.
They
I
are.
mean, there is decomposition, but it's
Sure.
It's controlled.
It's interesting.
not as if you were in a warm 90-degree
Right.
house. That would be not good.
No,
Yeah,
good.
I
Right.
don't like that.
Right.
Yeah, so one of the in 2009, I started to prepare to perhaps help families do green burials. So I studied under Peg Lorenz, and her website it's actually on the resource pages that I sent
Okay.
along, and Peaceful Passages Home. And she has a very good outline about how to care for the body, how to do the paperwork if you wanted to do it yourself. And so there's just a lot of information there that can be accessed.
Are there states where this is not allowed in the United States, or is it available everywhere?
I don't know of any states that doesn't allow green burial.
Okay.
I think there are some controls about, in some states, funeral directors have to present the body to the cemetery.
Okay.
But it's up to the cemetery the cemetery in Massachusetts is the body that regulates green burial, or
Okay.
what the regulations are, what is allowed.
Joan, if someone's thinking of a green burial, can you just go through the steps that someone would have to check off to say, okay, now I'm all set. I know when I die, I've put everything in place. Like, what are those steps? What does one have to do?
Well, it all depends on what your choices are. But if you would like a green burial, then you need to find a site. You need to find a cemetery that will allow you to be buried there. And if it's not offered in your town, you may have to start talking with the town officials to see if it can be offered in your town. Or if you can't to make that happen, then you may have to prepare to perhaps transport a body to a cemetery that would. And so so at death, then you need to make a decision. Am I going to do this myself, or am I going to give this loving care over to a funeral director? Or you may choose to work with the funeral director and do some parts of it, like caring for the body, cleaning the body before it goes to the funeral home,
Okay.
asking them to do perhaps the paperwork and the transportation. Now, if you're going to do everything yourself, you need to be prepared to get the paperwork done, because now it's all done electronically.
Right.
And if the funeral director's not going to do it, then the town clerk or the burial agent in your town or city needs to do it. So you need to establish that relationship and see if they are going to assist you in doing that. And that's not, that takes some time and some effort.
So
to
it
get
seems like you
everything
have to
in the
like
right
build these relationships with these certain people ahead of
Right.
time.
Ahead of time. Correct.
I guess the first
And-
step is to find a place
Go
where
ahead.
you can do a green burial and start from there. And I would think if you found a cemetery that offered it, they would be helpful in pointing you in the
Not
right direction.
necessarily.
No?
The cemetery only does the burial part.
Okay. So
They're not doing
Oh.
right. I thought
Right.
maybe they would, be able to,
Maybe as it
point you in a
becomes more
direction
popular.
of where to go in regards to funeral homes. It might be helpful or whatnot, but maybe not. Maybe it's a lot
They
more
might not.
groundwork.
They might, but they
Hmm.
might not. I mean, some people are being transported from the East metropolitan area of Massachusetts out to Western Massachusetts, which offers green burial to non-residents because we have land out here.
Hmm.
And so
Okay.
we're not so full as some of the metropolitan areas. So
Well, you have me sold on it, but I'm really curious about is the cost. How does it
Yeah.
compare to a traditional burial? I mean, I would think it'd be less expensive, but something's telling me it may not be. So let me know.
Well, you're right. It may not be, because it all depends on what you choose.
Mm-hmm.
And so let me just break down some of the costs. So
Okay.
you're not going to need to find a lot or a place where you can be buried. So that may cost, if you're a town resident, your town may only charge $400. I mean, there's some towns that hardly charge any thing for a plot because they are burying their townspeople. But if you're an out of town person and you come to the cemetery in my town, it's $1,000 for a plot. It can be a lot of money at Mount Auburn Cemetery. Candace, how much is it?
Well, I think an average cost right now is somewhere around $25,000.
$25,000. Back up.
That's at Mount
At Mount
Auburn.
Auburn Cemetery,
Right.
which is a garden cemetery.
Okay.
That's right.
If it also looked like
$25,000 for a
That's
plot?
what I said. Yes,
What?
that's what I said.
But that's a particular
Yes.
cemetery that's very sought
But-
after.
Oh my word. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Alright.
then you decide what kind of box or shroud or something that you want to purchase. Again, that can be very expensive, or you can make it yourself, or use a sheet or something like that.
Yep.
Then if you decide to do it yourself, you would save some money. But if you decide to use a funeral home, it can be up to $5,000,
Hmm.
even for the
Okay.
green burial. So the basic immediate burial is what it's called. And so that doesn't mean any services like, funeral services or anything in a church, just caring for the body, doing the paperwork, transporting the body to the cemetery, and simple bury in the cemetery.
Joan, if
And
you're
then you
doing
could have-
everything yourself, how do you transport the body?
Well, in order to transport the body, you have to have a burial permit. So the first thing that has to be done is the death certificate. The death certificate generates the transit permit. And then when the family gets the transit permit, whether it's the funeral home doing it or the town clerk, then you may transport your loved one to whatever cemetery you choose. So it's that transit permit that's really vital to get. And if the person dies on a weekend, you gotta wait a couple days in order to be able to get like a town clerk or something like that. So that's going to be some planning ahead of time.
This is very unfamiliar territory to me, and I have to say, I'd be like, I don't know where to start, and I need a checklist. Is there
Yes.
like a roadmap for this process
Well,
somewhere?
as I said, this Peaceful Passages at Home has one.
Peaceful
There are
passages.
death doulas. There are funeral guides. And some of those resources are on our website, which we're going to
Okay.
show you our
Okay.
contact information at the end. So
Joan, what are death doulas?
death doulas, sort of like a death midwife, like a birth midwife, and now we have certified death doulas that have been trained and can guide a family. They're not licensed funeral directors, so they can't do what a funeral director does, but they can teach the family to care for their
Oh.
loved one.
Interesting.
Are they only brought in after death? Like they're not part of like a hospice team or anything like that?
They can be brought in before
Okay.
if you have interest in time. Yep.
Okay.
So clearly there's a huge range in cost depending on where you
Correct.
go, but in general, does it tend to be the same cost or less or more, or is it hard to really generalize?
It is hard to generalize because of, as I said, choice.
Okay.
So it can be less expensive, especially if you're doing a lot of it yourself,
Okay.
because you're paying for these services,
Right.
and
I mean,
funeral directors have to keep the lights on.
right. And I'm just thinking, caskets themselves can be thousands and thousands of dollars, so you must be saving on that. There's got to be some areas you're
Right.
saving on financially.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You just said an important point. You said, funeral directors and whatnot have to keep the lights on. So, do they have, are they opposed to this, or do they support this type of process in general? Or is it variable depending on the funeral director, I guess?
Right.
Well, I can say that the funeral directors in my area have been very supportive. I mean, they want to serve the people in the community, and so that yes, they're very willing
That's
to.
good.
And in fact, there was a funeral home that was bringing a shrouded body to the cemetery and the tray was made of composite board, which is formaldehyde glue all glued together. And I said, next time,
Yeah.
it needs to be something that's more biodegradable. So they went and searched it, and they came up with a nice
Oh,
biodegradable tray.
That's great.
nice.
I mean, I think this seems very alien to us just because in the United States, this hasn't been the norm, but it is the norm other places, it seems, other countries.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
it's just that we're not used to it, but it's really not that unusual for some cultures.
No, it isn't.
Yeah, interesting.
So, can you ladies speak to a family that went through this and kind of what their process was and
Just as far as how what their experience was.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
maybe a positive experience compared to maybe the traditional.
like
format.
what were they able to do that gave them peace?
Well, I can speak only to my own experience because 10 years ago, our family took care of my husband, my kid's dad. And so he was cared for by hospice. And then when he died, we didn't have a green cemetery available that I knew of, except out of state. And so I decided that, and I talked with the kids and they thought it was a good idea. So we cared for Dennis and we dressed him in cotton and appropriate clothing. And then I delegated some of the jobs. And so the boys went and took the death certificate to the doctor because then it was the pronouncement certificate that they had. This was before the electronic death certificate,
Sure.
so it was a little easier, but
Right.
it's about the same process. And then they also went to I didn't have a good source for a pine box, and except for a funeral direct, and I knew that funeral homes had them, so they went and picked up that at a funeral director and at a funeral home, and then they went and got rented a van because it needed to be long enough, because we were going to. So I called the green cemetery that I knew. It was in Maine, and he was from
Okay.
Maine, so it felt that's really good. We can take
Yeah.
him back to Maine. So
Yeah.
it was a 2.5 hour drive, but it was worth it. We just all went in a little caravan out to Leamington, Maine, which is west of Portland. And we had a little service graveside. And Gary was the sexton, and he said, as we unloaded the pine box from the van, he said, I want Dennis to face the east. And I just thought, oh my gosh, he's taking such good care of us and taking good care of Dennis, so that it really felt like that was the place that we wanted to leave him. And then the family lowered Dennis into the grave, and it was winter time. So it was between snowstorms. So this was a tree forest. And so as Gary said, it's the metabolic activity of the forest, of the trees, that keeps the ground from freezing. And so they had no problem digging. And so there was no snow or anything or ice crystals in the mound next to his grave. So we lowered him in the ground, and then we had a little service, and then we all went home and had a party in the spring.
And it sounds like that process gave you some sense of peace, maybe more than a traditional.
It did.
Yeah.
It did. It was beautiful. And I didn't have to, separate from him. It was our family lowering him into his final resting place. So
That's a good point.
It was very beautiful. And as I said before, the boys said wouldn't want to do it any other way. So I'm hoping that they'll also do it for me, but we'll see.
Are there grave markers just in in a traditional cemetery, or so?
Actually, some green cemeteries have no markers; they just do GPS.
Okay.
But there can be a flat marker, typically, natural stone, not something that's
Okay.
but it can be engraved with the name and the birth date and the date of death.
Interesting.
Perhaps.
And I don't want to get too far afield from what we're talking about, but I think the burial at sea is kind of a similar type of thought process in a way, right? I mean, it's kind of going back to nature without all of this other stuff, metal boxes and cement and all that.
Right.
I don't know too much about it. I've always found it interesting, though. I don't know if you know much about it either, but I suspect you know more than I know about it.
Well, I don't know very much about it, but there is a gentleman burial at sea resource on our website, so you can.
Oh, that's cool.
But there are many boats that take.
Yeah, you have to go out a
bodies
certain.
out. Of course, they have to
3 miles, I believe, from the coast.
3 miles, and you have to have
hope
ballast
so.
on the.
You're gonna be swimming off horse and
Container.
have a body
Yeah.
kind of touch ankles.
And what I've seen, they're almost in like a canvas, I guess, bag of some sort when they're
Right.
they're lowered
With
into the
bells on.
ocean. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
similar thought process, I think, in a way, but more for people, I guess, who are more in tune with the ocean and spent their lives there, I would think.
Right.
So,
It's a choice.
It's a choice.
One of the
exactly.
choices.
Well, this is fascinating.
Options.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
really is.
When I listened to your first presentation, I was like, I had no idea this existed, and this sounds like super cool. And it just gives another choice, like another alternative, especially as people,
Right.
as the trend seems to become more friendly for our environment. It's, and I just had no idea that cremation was not friendly.
Certainly a topic I knew nothing about. I love doing podcasts like this because I
Yes.
learn a lot. I mean, really not anything.
Yeah,
I bet most people out there really have not heard about this, or if they have, they have very limited superficial knowledge. So this has been great. It's very helpful.
Well, when we go to speak now, we don't as much hear, oh, is that legal? But we did a tabling at a Amherst Sustainability Fair, and one person did say, is it legal? And I said,
Yeah.
yes, it's always been legal.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a question I can see
Sure, I
coming
can
up
see
for
people
sure.
bringing that up. Absolutely.
So if you want to research, is there an easy way to research what burials, like where green burials are? Like green
Yes, our
cemeteries,
website
I'm
is
sorry.
we have a full database
Okay.
on our website. It certainly doesn't have all of the cemeteries in Massachusetts on it, but there are many, and so that would be a good place to start.
And
If you're looking for
I think that'll be on the
green burials
slides.
that are
We'll
certified.
post that. Yeah.
Okay.
The Green Burial Council has a list of certified cemeteries by state.
Okay.
Okay.
And we'll make sure that information is somehow attached to the podcast so our viewers have it, because that'll be important
Right.
for them to research and look into if they're interested.
And there's a couple of books. There's
Mhm.
Grave Matters, of course, which we already referenced, and then there's also Changing Landscapes by Lee
Okay.
Webster, which is a nice resource.
Great.
Great. Thank you.
Interesting. Very interesting.
So, Candace and Joan, if you had one message that you'd like to leave our audience with, what would that message be?
Candace, why don't you
Yeah.
start?
One of the things we've been concentrating on for the past several years, practically a decade really, is finding something called a conservation burial ground. And that would be something that looks like conservation land as you drive by it, but in fact, there are burials in it. So it looks like an open meadow or a lovely forest and meadow area. And we've been trying for a long time to find one of these parcels. And what makes it a conservation burial ground is that we have partnered with land trusts. And so the land trust would be responsible for overseeing the habitat or maybe a specific species. And the cemetery would be perhaps just 10 acres out of 50 acres of conserved land. And I would love it if a homeowner says, oh my goodness, I have these 50 acres of land and I want to be buried on the land. And so instead of just thinking of them and their family to be buried on the land, what if this could be a public resource so that we could invite more than just the family, but many other people who are part of your community to be buried on the land. So that's the message I would like to get out. It's about conservation.
That's a good one. There might be some folks out there who, may
Have a
be
little bit of
interested
land.
in doing that.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Joan?
And I would like to have people plan and write down their plan and fund their plan money wise, because it's going to, end of life is expensive. And so those are things so make a plan, write it down, and put money with it so that your family doesn't have to do a lot of the running around and figuring out what it is that you might want.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's great.
So there's lots of options. You can choose green burial, you can choose conventional burial,
Great.
or cremation, or burial at sea.
Yep. Very good. Very good.
All right. And then how
And
do
now, and pretty soon, maybe we'll have human composting and water cremation.
Oh, that's another podcast, human composting. I don't know that I'm quite up to that yet, but we'll think about it. And then if people would like to get in touch with you and learn more about this, where can they contact you?
We are at greenburialmassachusetts.org. We manage a telephone, and those numbers will be in the notes at the end of the program as well.
Perfect.
And we have an email, info at
Green
Green Burial
Burial
Message.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We really appreciate you being on our show. It's an interesting topic that I knew nothing about. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience will find it interesting too. So thank you so much. And I want to thank all of our listeners for listening to our show. And if you'd like to become a sponsor, please contact us at 774-319-4230. Special thanks to Ron Gamache for our intro music, Primacare, your trusted medical provider in southeastern New England, and BioSkills of the Northeast for producing our show. And available to produce your show by calling 774-301-8811, and they do a great job. Bay Coast Bank, which is just right for all your financial needs. Visit baycoast.bank or call 508-678-7641 to learn more. And Duncan Hearing Healthcare you can trust, with sites in Fall River, Dartmouth, Falmouth, and Centerville. For more information, visit their website, duncanhearing.com. Once again, thank you very much for being on our show, Joan and Candace. We really appreciate it. This was a really interesting topic, which, like I said, I knew very little about. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience has too. And we really appreciate you taking the time out today to discuss with us green burials.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much for having us.
Oh, you're
Thank
so
you
welcome.
for having us.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye.